Today I'm going to be reviewing the NIV Verse Mapping Bible, and I'm also going to be talking about the Verse Mapping Bible Study Journal. They're both based on a study system by Christy Cambron. It's called Verse Mapping, obviously. If we look at the back of the box here, it just goes over there's 5 steps to verse mapping. So you select a verse and write it out. You record it in 2 or 3 other Bible translations, underline key words. Just look up the Hebrew or Greek meanings for the underlined words. Ask yourself some questions. Imagine what it would be like to be there. Read the verses surrounding that verse and use some other study tools to dig deeper. And then just ask yourself some questions like, what's God saying to you? How does this verse relate to your life today? So those are the steps of verse mapping. This Bible has 350 partially completed verse maps and 70 blank verse maps. So we'll get into all of that in just a second here. Excuse my dishwasher in the background if you hear strange gurgling noises going on while I'm doing this. So this is an imitation leather cover. There's a textured flower pattern here on the front with navy blue in the background. We have a tan colored spine, and the back has perimeter stitching. There are 2 ribbons, and it does have a sewn binding. There's a paper paste down liner, a presentation page, table of contents, alphabetical order for the books of the Bible, a letter from the editor. And then this explains how to verse map, so you definitely want to read this, especially if you're not familiar with verse mapping. It lets you know what tools you need, and just goes over those 5 steps that I briefly talked about in a little more detail. Then we have the preface, and then we get right into the Old Testament. So each book has an introduction, has an author, the date written, where it takes place, some themes, and then a paragraph or 2 introduction. So nice and simple. The text is an 8-point font. It's in the NIV Comfort Print. It's a double column layout. There are light lines here in the margins for you to take notes. I'm just going to show you a verse map here. So here's one on Genesis 3:6. You can see it's partially filled in. They have the verse written out in the NIV. They also have it written out in 2 other translations, New King James, NASB. And then they did the develop step here, and then the actions and outcome steps are blank for you to fill in. So it's just kind of nice as you're getting used to it to see some examples and still get to engage as well in those last 2 steps. Here's another that's partially filled in of a verse from Exodus. Same thing, you fill in that steps 4 and 5. And then this is a blank one here, so you get to do all the steps, and you also get to choose which verse you want to map out. They don't pick that for you in the ones that are blank. Okay, here's another example from 2 Samuel. The first 3 steps are filled in for you, and then you fill in 4 and 5. This is another example of a book introduction. This is Job here. And at the end of each book, they usually have a blank verse map as well. Plus they're spread throughout. See here we're in Psalms. Another verse map. Skip around a little bit here. And this is a black letter text. As you can see, we're now in the New Testament. This is a verse map on Luke. When we get to the end of the Bible, then, we have a table of weights and measures. We have a topical index, which goes just a couple pages. And then there's some note pages at the end. And then we're at the end of the Bible. So I really like the idea of verse mapping. The NIV is a nice, easy translation to understand. I like how verse mapping incorporates using multiple translations and comparing them as well. The only complaint I have about this Bible is I'm not a fan of the NIV comfort print. So that's just a personal preference. It's just not my favorite. I don't like how some of the letters don't look like they connect. So that's just my personal preference. There's nothing wrong with it. I just don't really like it personally. Then we have this verse mapping journal, which is spiral bound. You can see there's a guide, there's a sample, and then there's a whole bunch of verse maps. There's some study plans, a reference guide, and then acknowledgments. So I'll just quickly go through this a little bit. This is the guide in the beginning, just kind of goes through all the steps, tells you what you're going to need and how to do it. And it goes through each of the 5 steps and a couple pages for each step. It's a note from the author. And they give you a sample map here. And then you just get into all the blank verse maps. These are not filled in for you. These you choose the verse yourself and fill in. I like that there's a little more space in this. I like that it's spiral bound. It's easier to write in. So I'll probably start verse mapping by using this journal. I'm just going to skip, because these are all the same. These are just verse maps, blank verse maps, the whole journal then. So then we have some study plans back here. We have a plan on faith, parables, healing, miracles, prayer, and ministry. It just gives you the verses and you do everything yourself. And then there's a reference and resource guide, just giving you some ideas of books and websites you can use to help you in your verse mapping journey. So that is the Verse Mapping Bible Study Journal by Christy Cambron, and then grab the box here, the NIV Verse Mapping Bible. So I'm excited to try it out. I've never done verse mapping before, so I'm really interested to start reading about it more and start practicing.